You might close your eyes now if you wish. Imagine with me the hush of twilight settling over an ancient city. The air is soft, carrying the last warmth of the sun but already touched by the cool breath of evening. Ahead, rising out of the flat, fertile plain, are the walls of Uruk, broad and high, built from sun-dried bricks that still hold the day's heat. They glow with an amber hue, and the shadows lengthen across their surface like slow-moving rivers of dusk. These are the walls of Gilgamesh's city, and tonight you and I will step quietly inside them. The gates are wide, meant for oxen carts and long caravans of traders, but in this hour most are already home. A few stragglers hurry through, a potter balancing a basket of freshly fired bowls, a farmer with dust on his sandals and tired eyes, a young girl holding her mother's hand, her other hand clutching a clay doll. As we walk with them into Uruk, listen for the sound of sandals on stone, the creak of wooden wheels, and the occasional call of a guard, his voice echoing in the narrowing corridors of the gate. There is a feeling of safety here, of being enclosed and sheltered, for these walls were said to be unmatched in all Mesopotamia. They are as much a monument to human determination as they are a barrier against enemies. Inside the city, the day is winding down. Fires flicker in hearths and smoke rises in thin, winding trails, carrying with it the fragrance of roasting meat, of bread just pulled from clay ovens, of herbs crushed into stews. Can you smell it? The air is heavy with cumin and garlic, with sesame oil and the faint sweetness of dates. A merchant's family sits together outside their doorway, tearing flatbread into pieces, passing them to children who chatter sleepily. At the corner of the street, a weaver ties off her loom, her hands sore from the day, her eyes already closing as she thinks of rest. And somewhere in the distance, a flute plays, its notes drifting on the night air like moths toward a flame. Uruk is alive, not only with kings and warriors, but with people whose names we will never know. If you pause for a moment, you can imagine their lives as if they were your own. The young mother rocking her child, humming a tune that she herself once heard from her mother. The baker waking before dawn, kneading dough by lamplight so that the city will awaken to the comfort of bread. The temple servant sweeping the courtyard, whispering a prayer beneath her breath as she works. These small, steady rhythms woven together are what truly keep the city alive. And yet, above all of this daily life stands Gilgamesh, the king. His palace looms over Uruk, its halls echoing with the voices of scribes and priests. Torches line its walls, casting long shadows across carved stone lions and bronze inlays. To his people, he is more than a man. 2/3 divine, they say, born of a goddess, his body taller, stronger, and more radiant than any other. But to some, he is also a burden. For when a ruler is too powerful, too restless, the weight falls on the backs of those who have no voice. This is the paradox of Uruk, a city both blessed and troubled by the greatness of its king. Imagine being a woman in Uruk in these days. You might live in a mud brick house with its single room and roof terrace where you dry laundry and store jars of grain. Your day begins with water fetched from a nearby well, carried home in clay pots that press grooves into your shoulders. You grind barley on a stone slab, your arms aching with the effort. You knead dough, bake bread, spin wool, weave cloth. If you are lucky, your husband works in the fields and you can sell his surplus grain in the market. If not, you barter your weaving for oil, for salt, for honey. When you hear the footsteps of soldiers, you hold your child a little closer, for the will of the king is often felt in the homes of the powerless. Life is not cruel every day, but it is heavy, and you learn to carry that weight with quiet endurance. And so, we stand at the meeting place between two worlds, the grandeur of Gilgamesh and the softness of the people who live beneath his rule. Can you hear the difference? His palace speaks in thunder, but the homes of Uruk speak in whispers, the creak of a door, the murmur of prayer, the sigh of a mother at rest. Both are true, both real, and both are needed to understand this city. As night deepens, the temples of Uruk become the heart of the city's soundscape. Priests chant hymns to Inanna, goddess of love and war. The temple lamps burn fragrant oil, and the smoke curls upward like threads connecting heaven and earth. Young girls carry offerings, figs, honey, beer, and place them on the altars with bowed heads. Ordinary people linger outside, listening, their hearts lifted by the rhythm of the words even if they cannot read the tablets from which they are recited. For in this city, stories are not written for the few alone. They are told aloud, sung, repeated until even children in the streets can hum the cadences of ancient myths. And what of you? Wandering through Uruk tonight, you might feel the cool dust beneath your feet, taste the faint grit in the air as a breeze stirs the street. You might notice how the walls close in, the alleys twisting like veins lined with houses pressed together shoulder to shoulder. Every corner has its own life. An old man telling riddles to boys perched on the steps, a young woman carrying a jar balanced effortlessly on her head, a dog sleeping in the shadow of a clay oven. The city is not just a place. It is a living thing, breathing through all who call it home. Above it all, the stars appear. The Mesopotamians were careful watchers of the sky. They saw in its patterns the whispers of gods, the order of the universe written in light. Tonight, as you tilt your head back, the constellations rise, symbols etched in heaven, mirrored in the stories passed down generation after generation. For the people of Uruk, these stars are not just lights. They are guardians, storytellers, reminders that human life is fleeting, but meaning stretches far beyond it. This is the city Gilgamesh ruled. And this is where our journey begins, not only with kings and quests, but with people like you, like me, ordinary souls whose lives are woven into the fabric of history. To enter Uruk is to walk among them all, to feel their hopes and weariness, to taste their bread and smell their incense, to see through their eyes as much as through the eyes of a God-born king. And perhaps now, as your mind drifts gently in this lullaby of history, you can let yourself rest a little more deeply. For though the story will carry us through battles and grief, through quests and loss, here at the beginning there is only the quiet wonder of entering a city at twilight. The stones are warm beneath your touch, the streets alive with voices, the sky rich with stars. If you're enjoying this journey, you can follow along for more stories each week. For now, close your eyes and linger here in Uruk, where time stretches softly and history whispers like a lullaby.
When we speak of Gilgamesh, we often begin with the words that echo across millennia: 2/3 God and 1/3 man. It sounds almost mathematical, doesn't it? But in truth, such numbers can only hint at the mystery of who he was. Imagine a man whose presence filled every space he entered. His frame taller than the tallest soldier, his muscles honed like bronze under sunlight, his eyes fierce as a lion's, and his voice carrying the certainty of command. In the streets of Uruk, children whispered his name with awe, while elders bowed their heads in a mix of reverence and fear. And yet, divinity is not always a blessing. When the gods give too much of themselves to a man, it can twist the fragile balance of his heart. Gilgamesh was beautiful, strong, radiant beyond mortal measure, but restless, always restless. He carried a hunger inside him, a fire that could not be contained by palace walls or temple rituals. That fire, left unguarded, often spilled over into the lives of his people. For the citizens of Uruk, this restlessness was a weight. To the mason building houses, it was felt in the endless demands for stone and labor to raise monuments that glorified the king more than the gods. To the farmer, it was seen in levies and burdens that left less grain for his own family. To the women of the city, it was something deeper still, the fear of Gilgamesh himself, who, in his arrogance, believed that all lives within Uruk belonged to him, especially theirs. Imagine you are one of these women. Your home is small, its walls coated with the pale dust of clay. You grind barley each morning, your hands rough from the stone. You listen for your husband's steps, for your children's laughter, and yet your ears are always tuned for another sound. The approach of soldiers, the whisper that the king himself might come. For Gilgamesh claimed the right to enter any marriage bed, to take what was not his. And though gods were said to smile upon him, women wept in the shadows for the choices stripped from them. What do you call such a ruler, savior, or thief? Both, perhaps, yet pause with me here. It would be easy to name him cruel and leave it at that. But cruelty alone does not explain the heart of this man. Gilgamesh was not born with malice. He was born with greatness he did not know how to carry. Can you imagine such a burden? To feel the strength of 10 men in your arms, but to wake each day unsure of what that strength is for? To be told since childhood that you are destined for more than others, and to see in their eyes both devotion and resentment? When you are more than human, where do you belong? among gods who never die, or among mortals who will wither and be gone. It is in this loneliness that much of his tyranny was rooted. A man who does not know his place will test the limits of everything around him. Gilgamesh tested the patience of his people, the sanctity of their homes, even the tolerance of the gods. His arrogance was not only a wound to others, it was a shield against the fear that he might never be enough, or worse, that his greatness would mean nothing once death came for him. In the streets of Uruk, the people endured. They continued their weaving, their farming, their prayers. But beneath the surface, they grumbled. They raised their voices to the heavens, not always aloud, but in the quiet of their own hearts. Mothers whispered to Inanna, asking her to protect their daughters. Fathers spoke to Shamash, pleading for justice and fairness. And children learned too early the difference between reverence and fear. And what of Gilgamesh in his palace? Did he hear these cries? Perhaps he did. Perhaps in the stillness of night, when the fires burned low and silence crept into the hallways, he felt the weight of his choices pressing against him. For a king may command the bodies of his people, but he cannot command their hearts. And no man, not even one born of gods, can escape the loneliness of an empty heart. Still, in daylight, the image was different. By morning, Gilgamesh was again a blazing force. He strode through the markets, his robe heavy with gold thread, his crown catching the light. Merchants bowed low, though their eyes did not always meet his. Scribes carried tablets at his side, ready to record his words as though each syllable was already history. When he passed, the crowd parted, not unlike reeds on the river bank when a boat slices through. And yet, when he was gone, the whispers returned. Awestruck, yes, but weary too. Always weary. There is a strange truth about power. It can inspire as much as it oppresses. Many in Uruk, even as they suffered, could not help but marvel at the king's vitality. For he was a vision of what it meant to be strong, to endure, to seem untouchable. In him, they saw the gods' favor, perhaps even a kind of protection. Was it not better, they asked themselves, to have a mighty ruler feared by others, even if feared by his own? Was it not safer, in a dangerous world, to live beneath the shadow of such a man, rather than without him? And so, the people endured. They balanced reverence with resentment, fear with fascination. They told stories of their king at night, some admiring, some bitter, some full of envy. In this way, Gilgamesh's name grew larger than his deeds. For though he was flesh and blood, to his people he became both nightmare and guardian, tyrant and savior, all bound in one. This is the weight of a king's crown, not only the gold and jewels that glitter on the brow, but the restless burden of power that can never be set aside. For Gilgamesh, it was both privilege and prison. For his people, it was both pride and suffering. And between them stretched a silence, like the silence between heartbeats, filled with unspoken questions. How might you feel, living under such a ruler, both awestruck and weary? Perhaps you already know. Perhaps you felt it in your own life, in the presence of someone who seemed larger than the world, yet too heavy for it as well. If thoughts stir within you, you might share them, here, quietly, or with others who listen to stories such as these. For history is not only the story of kings, but of those who lived in their shadow. And in the end, perhaps that shadow tells us as much as the light. In the wide, open steppe, far from the noise of Uruk's walls, there was once a man who was not entirely a man. His name was Enkidu. He was shaped by the gods themselves, not born of a mother's womb or a father's seed, but molded from clay and blessed with the spirit of wildness. His body was covered with hair like an animal's pelt, his stride as sure and swift as the gazelle, his strength equal to the lion's. He did not wear the woven cloth of city dwellers. He did not know the weight of sandals or the taste of bread. He was, at first, a creature of the untamed world, Picture him now, moving through tall grasses that sway in the endless wind. He drinks from the streams where deer bend their necks, and he rests beside the animals as though he were one of them. The herds accept him. The beasts of the field do not flee from him, for he is kin to them. Where the trapper sets his snares, Enkidu frees the animals. Where men claim the land as fields, he walks through it without care, indifferent to boundary or ownership. His freedom is boundless, his world measured only by the horizon. And yet, even freedom can be a kind of loneliness. For though the wild beasts run beside him, they do not speak to him. Though he shares in their life, he remains apart. Have you ever felt that paradox, the closeness of others, and yet the aching distance of being different? Enkidu, though he could not name it, lived within that space. He was a man among animals, and an animal among men. He belonged fully to neither. News of him traveled, as all stories do. A trapper, frustrated by his ruined snares, came before Gilgamesh and told of the wild man who undid his work. Gilgamesh, curious and perhaps wary, ordered that a plan be made, not to kill Enkidu, but to draw him out of the wilderness. And so the trapper went to the temple, seeking a woman whose presence might weave the wild man into the human world. Her name was Shamhat, a woman of wisdom as much as beauty, whose life was devoted to the temple of Inanna. Imagine her as she walked out into the steppe, her hair braided with care, her garments bright against the grasses. She was calm, patient, knowing the power of gentleness. She found Enkidu where the animals gathered, and she did not fear him. She sat in the open, waiting, her presence a quiet invitation. And when Enkidu came near, drawn by curiosity, she welcomed him not with snares or shouts, but with tenderness. For 6 days and 7 nights, she remained with him, teaching him not only of love, but of companionship, of touch, of being known, and something began to change in him. When he returned to the animals, they no longer recognized him. They sniffed and turned away, as though he carried a scent no longer of the wild, but of humanity. The gazelles would not run at his side. The deer fled from his approach. Enkidu felt the ache of loss, yet also the stirrings of something new. Shamhat gave him bread to eat, wine to drink. At first, he did not understand. He had never tasted such things. But soon the bread filled his belly, the wine warmed his body, and he grew joyful in the presence of others. He learned to anoint himself with oil, to clothe his body in woven garments. Step by step, he was crossing the threshold from wilderness into city. Still, within him remained the strength of the wild. His arms could fell beasts. His legs could outpace the fastest runners. He was no ordinary man, and the city would soon feel the tremor of his presence. For Shamhat told him of Gilgamesh, this mighty king who ruled Uruk, who oppressed his people, who claimed all as his own. And Enkidu, hearing this, was stirred with anger. I will go to Uruk, he said. I will challenge this king. Let him not be so proud when he meets his equal. And so the journey began. Imagine Enkidu walking for the first time along the roads that lead to Uruk, no longer accompanied by deer or gazelle, but by the steady stride of his own determination. The air grew thick with the scent of hearth fires and incense as he approached the city gates. The walls loomed before him, vast and unyielding. For one who had known only open plains, this must have felt like entering the ribs of some great beast. A cage of stone. But Enkidu did not flinch. His heart beat steady, ready for what awaited. In the city, the people marveled. Who was this stranger? As strong as the king himself, his hair still wild, his frame like carved oak. Whispers rose. Perhaps he was sent by the gods. Perhaps he was the answer to their prayers. And when at last he met Gilgamesh, the two did not greet each other with words. They clashed. Restlessness has a way of gnawing at the heart. Even with a throne beneath him, even with walls that gleamed in the sunlight and people who whispered his name, Gilgamesh could not be still. He was part man and part god, but fully unsatisfied. Power without purpose can feel like an empty cup, no matter how finely it is carved. And so it was that, not long after Enkidu had become his friend and equal, Gilgamesh's eyes turned outward, beyond Uruk's walls, beyond the farmland, beyond the horizon. He spoke to Enkidu of the great cedar forest to the north, a place of beauty and danger, where trees rose so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. It was said that the forest was guarded by Humbaba, a creature of terrible visage, set there by the god Enlil to ward off mortals. For generations, men had spoken of the forest in awe but kept their distance. Gilgamesh, however, was not like other men. His heart pounded with longing, to test himself, to carve his name into eternity, to defy the limits placed before him. He said to Enkidu, "Come with me. Let us travel to the cedar forest. Let us strike down Humbaba. Let us cut the trees and bring them back to Uruk, so that our city will be known for greatness." Enkidu listened. He had once roamed free among the wilds, and he knew what sacred places meant. The forest was no mere collection of trees. It was a holy realm, a sanctuary of the divine. His heart trembled at the thought of violating it. Yet he also knew Gilgamesh's restless spirit. He saw in his friend both the hunger for glory and the loneliness that haunted him. Enkidu sighed and agreed. He would not let Gilgamesh walk into danger alone. And so their journey began. Imagine them leaving Uruk in the cool of the morning, the gates of the city opening slowly, the people watching with mixed pride and dread. Gilgamesh carried weapons of gleaming bronze, forged by the finest smiths. Enkidu carried his strength and the wisdom of the steppe. Together, they walked into the unknown. The road to the cedar forest was long, winding through valleys and across rivers. At night, they built fires and lay beneath the stars. Gilgamesh spoke of glory, of how future generations would sing of their courage. Enkidu listened, though his own thoughts drifted back to the animals of the plains and the quiet rhythm of the earth. Still, he remained at Gilgamesh's side. For what is friendship if not the willingness to share another's path, even when it is not the one you would have chosen alone? As they drew nearer, the land began to change. The air grew cooler, touched with the sharp fragrance of cedar carried on the wind. The trees appeared first as distant pillars, dark against the horizon, and then as giants towering above them, their trunks wide as city gates, their crowns whispering secrets to the clouds. The forest seemed alive, not just with birds and animals, but with presence, a weight that pressed upon the spirit. Every breath was filled with the resonant scent of the trees, every step muffled by a carpet of fallen needles. Light struggled to pierce the canopy, and shadows shifted as though watching. And there, somewhere within, was Humbaba. Legends described him in many ways. A giant with the face of a lion, or perhaps a twisted thing with eyes that glowed like fire. His voice was said to roar like a storm, his breath to scorch like flame. Yet more than his form, it was his aura that terrified, an aura placed upon him by Enlil, heavy with the dread of divinity. To meet him was to feel the crushing weight of insignificance, the reminder that mortals were not meant to trespass here. Still, Gilgamesh pressed forward. His heart beat like a drum, not with fear, but with exhilaration. Enkidu followed, torn between reverence and loyalty. When at last Humbaba appeared, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Trees stilled, birds fell silent. He rose from the shadows like a mountain of flesh and fury, his voice thundering through the trunks. Who dares enter the realm of the gods? Who dares disturb the sacred cedar forest? Gilgamesh raised his weapons, his body gleaming with sweat and courage. Enkidu stepped forward, steady, his heart pounding. Together they stood, two men against a being who was more than man. The battle that followed was no ordinary clash. Humbaba's roar shook the ground, his strides cracked roots, his hands could crush stone. Gilgamesh struck with his axe and sword, but each blow felt like striking the trunk of a great tree, unyielding, immense. Enkidu, wild-born and strong, grappled with him, trying to hold him back, his muscles straining as though he wrestled the weight of the earth itself. The forest became their arena. Branches splintered, birds scattered in panic. The scent of resin grew thick as bark split, and sap oozed like blood. The air was filled with the sounds of strife, steel against flesh, the grunt of effort, the cry of pain. At moments, Gilgamesh faltered. The aura of Humbaba was suffocating, whispering into his heart, "You are nothing. You are dust. You will be forgotten." Yet Enkidu's voice steadied him. "Stand firm, my brother. Together we are strong." And at moments, Enkidu faltered too, overcome by dread, but Gilgamesh's resolve pulled him onward. Back and forth they went, each giving the other the strength to continue. Finally, in a surge of will and desperation, they struck Humbaba down. His body fell with a crash that echoed through the forest, as though the world itself mourned. Silence followed, heavy and unsettling. And in that silence came the question, what had they done? Humbaba, the guardian set by the gods, now lay lifeless. The cedars, once proud and sacred, stood witness to the transgression. Gilgamesh and Enkidu had proven their bravery, yes, but at what cost? They cut down the trees, taking their timber as trophies. Gilgamesh's eyes shone with triumph, yet Enkidu's gaze was shadowed. For he knew that to defy the gods is never without consequence. Still, the bond between them deepened. In the face of divine terror, they had not faltered. They had leaned upon each other, and together they had prevailed. Companionship had made them more than men, but even in victory, questions lingered. What drives us more? Fear of insignificance, or the hunger for glory? Is it the dread of being forgotten that pushes us to risk everything, or the yearning to leave behind a mark, even upon sacred ground? Perhaps, as you rest tonight, you can let that question drift through your thoughts. For Gilgamesh and Enkidu's journey reminds us that even in the oldest stories, the struggles of the heart remain the same. If you'd like to follow more of these journeys, ancient, human, and eternal, I invite you to stay with me, to subscribe, and walk together through the mists of time. Desire can be as dangerous as a blade, and in ancient stories, it often takes the shape of gods. After the cedar forest, Gilgamesh returned to Uruk stronger, more famous, his name echoing through the streets like a drumbeat. People admired him. Children gazed at him in awe. Women whispered his name as though it might bring protection or trouble. But admiration, as you know, sometimes carries a hidden cost. Among those who looked upon him was Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. She was radiant, terrible, alluring, her beauty matched only by her tempestuous nature. To be chosen by her was a gift that could elevate a mortal to dazzling heights, but to refuse her was to invite ruin. One day, Ishtar approached Gilgamesh. In the tale, she spoke with promises. If he would take her as his lover, she would bestow upon him unimaginable wealth and power. She would harness the gifts of heaven for his sake, adorn him in splendor, and place the world itself at his feet. But Gilgamesh, proud and restless, did not bow. He looked upon the goddess and remembered her history. He knew of the men she had loved before, how each had fallen, abandoned or destroyed when her favor cooled. To Gilgamesh, her promises were not blessings but traps. And so, with arrogance sharp as a knife, he rejected her. He spoke not with gentleness, but with scorn. He mocked her, naming those she had broken, casting her affections as a curse rather than an honor. Imagine the silence after his words, the way the air must have trembled with insult. For to wound the pride of a mortal is one thing, but to wound a goddess is another. Ishtar's fury was swift. She ascended to the heavens, her voice crying out to Anu, her father, the god of the sky. She demanded vengeance upon Gilgamesh, demanded that the bull of heaven be unleashed against Uruk. At first Anu hesitated. Such a punishment would not fall upon Gilgamesh alone, but upon all the people. Yet Ishtar's rage was unrelenting. At last, the bull was given to her. The bull of heaven was no ordinary beast. In the language of myth, it was the very force of famine, drought, and disaster, a creature whose steps cracked the earth and withered the fields. When it descended upon Uruk, the city shook. Dust rose into the air, the ground split open, and rivers ran dry. Crops withered under a searing wind. People fell in terror, not knowing whether to flee or to beg. For the ancients who first told this story, the bull of heaven was not only a monster but a symbol. They lived at the mercy of the Tigris and Euphrates, of rains that might nourish or fail. A single season of drought could mean starvation. A single flood could sweep away homes. To them, such disasters were not random but divine, punishment from gods whose moods were as unpredictable as the weather. The bull of heaven was the shape they gave to that fear. Into this chaos stepped Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Together, they faced the beast. Picture the scene: the bull's breath scorching like fire, its hooves carving great pits into the earth, its bellows shaking the walls of Uruk. People clung to rooftops, praying, watching their king and his companion stand against a terror that no one else dared approach. The fight was brutal. Gilgamesh struck with his axe. Enkidu seized the creature's horns. Dust filled the air, cries echoed, and the ground itself trembled. Again and again, they clashed until, at last, the bull was brought down. Its massive body collapsed, the earth groaning beneath its weight. Relief swept through the city. For a moment, Uruk exhaled. The people had been spared, their king victorious, the goddess's wrath resisted. Songs may have been sung, prayers offered in gratitude. Yet beneath the celebration lingered unease. For what does it mean to kill the creature of a god? What does it mean to humiliate a goddess who embodies both love and war? Ishtar herself descended again, her fury unspent. She cursed Gilgamesh and Enkidu, cried out for vengeance. Some stories say she climbed to the walls of Uruk and wailed, while the people hurled insults back at her, emboldened by their king's defiance. Others say she stood among the ruins, her anger smoldering like embers that could not be extinguished. Either way, the tension remained, a shadow stretching across the triumph. And so we are left with a question: what drives us to defy forces greater than ourselves? Gilgamesh rejected love, not because he could not feel, but because his pride would not bend. He fought a divine beast, not simply to save his people, but to prove his might. His victory was real, yet already the seeds of tragedy were being sown. For the ancients, this story was not only about one man's arrogance, but about the fragile line between mortal life and divine will. They lived in a world where disaster could strike at any moment, where survival often meant offering prayers, sacrifices, and submission to powers unseen. Gilgamesh's defiance would have been thrilling to hear, perhaps even inspiring, but also deeply unsettling. Because if he could stand against the gods, what punishment might fall upon him, and upon everyone around him? And perhaps that is where we, too, can reflect. How do we face forces beyond our control, whether it is the turn of weather, the shifting of fortune, or even the tumult of love? Do we resist them, as Gilgamesh did, with bold defiance? Or do we bend, seek harmony, and hope to survive quietly in their shadow? As you drift towards sleep, let that question rest gently in your thoughts. For though the gods of old may no longer walk among us, the forces they symbolize still shape our lives. And if you find comfort in these ancient reflections, I invite you to stay with me, to listen again, and to share your thoughts. After all, stories like these grow stronger when we wonder together.